Hello, and welcome to AC's 8-Bit Zone. In this midweek episode, I'm going to study one of the more infamous chips in the Commodore 64, the Programmable Logic Array, or PLA chip. We're going to use the logic analyzer from an earlier episode, along with a new gadget that arrived this week in the mail. So whether you're just curious about how the PLA works, or if you'd like to learn some techniques for diagnosing a good or a bad PLA, then this episode is for you. So get your cup of coffee, your favorite drink, and let's go have a look under the hood. Come on. So why would we care to take a logic analyzer and measure the signals of the PLA chip? Well, one, it's one of the more failure-prone ICs in the Commodore 64. And two, it was described by the designers of the Commodore 64 as the glue logic that holds everything together. And three, it helps us to learn more about the inner workings of this legendary computer. So let's get started by opening this package. This is really well taped. All right, a dip chip clip. This one it's a wide body 28 pin and the 40 pin. Alright, let's place one of these on a Commodore 64 board. Here's what this C64 does when it's powered on. Now, I'm not suggesting that I know what the problem is, but I just wanted you to see what the failure looks like. So it's just a garbled screen with lines through, horizontal lines through it. This is the U17 PLA chip. I'm just going to clean the pins of U17 a little bit before I put the chip clip on. This board has not had any cleaning, and I want to keep the chip clip clean. There. That was very easy to remove. The pins above the socketed area looked very dirty, but below the socket was actually quite clean. So I'm just going to give this a little bit of a cleaning with some isopropyl alcohol. I think the chip clip is going to grab and make contact up higher on these pins. Alright, this PLA is the 906-114-01 MOS chip. We're going to go back in now. I'm going to make sure that I do not bend any pins on the reinsertion. Okay, that was good. And turning it on to see if this clip is making good contact with any of the pins, we'll start by checking the 5-volt rail. Yeah, it's not there. Okay, power back on. Let's see if we have 5 volts at the IC. Okay, 4.6. A little low, but it is getting VCC. The pins are a good bit corroded up here around the shoulders where the IC clip would make contact. Here are the cleaned pins after a little bit of light sanding compared to the other side that I haven't touched yet. You can just see the corrosion on the upper part of the shoulder of the pins, and that's exactly where the clip needs to make contact. So we're going to get that other side cleaned up to look like this one and get it back in the board. Or we want to see connectivity to the 5-volt rail on that pin, and this pin should be connected to ground. Okay, and it is. And I have the Commodore 64 schematic. This is the 1982 schematic. And I have the logic analyzer that we looked at in an earlier midweek coffee break video. And over there I have PulseView running on the laptop. Let's take a quick look at the PLA U17, and you can see that the PLA has 16 input pins shown over here on the left, and it has 8 output pins labeled F0 through F7, and then it has an unconnected FE pin, and there's VCC 5 volts. The output enable is permanently enabled low, and then the ground pin. So as far as signal pins that would actually have interesting signal, we have the 16 inputs and 8 outputs, and all 8 outputs are Boolean logic functions of these 16, some set of these 16 inputs. Some outputs may rely on all of these signals, but most likely not. A few of them probably are functions of a smaller subset of these 16 inputs. So I'll probably take a much more detailed look at this in the future, but just for this short episode, let's just see something basic that we could look at just to get started. Let's get our feet wet with looking into the PLA. So I'm curious what memory addresses are fetched early on after power on, early in the boot up cycle. So let's connect A15 through A12. And while we're at it, let's take a look at the BA, the AEC, and the read-write. Just because we have 8 channels and we're only using 4 of them right now. All right. Okay, so here we are in PulseView. I'm going to start at the highest sample rate that I have, which is 24 megasamples per second. And let's go ahead and label these channels. We have A15, A14, A13, A12, and then I think it was BA, which I'm thinking must stand for something like bus access. And then what do we have? AEC active low, right, AEC active low, and then we had read/write low, and that signal means it's reading when high and the processor is writing when low. Okay, so there is no trigger at the moment. However, I'm thinking that the processor is going to make some high address accesses early on. So we could take a guess and just say, all right, when we see address 15 rising edge, let's trigger on that. Okay, and then you could see over here, this is showing us which of these channels are part of the trigger condition. So the first channel, A15, is triggering on a rising edge. And I want to record a little more depth than that so that we have a better chance of catching some power on activity. So this is about 2 seconds worth of sampling time. So okay, right here is how much of the data is going to show before the trigger condition. So 1% of the data buffer will be used pre-trigger, and we're all set. So let's run this, and it shouldn't do anything. It should be waiting. and I'm going to power on now. Okay, got some data. I'm just going to go ahead and power the Commodore off, and this should hold the data we've already captured. So the basic ROM is at A and B, most significant nibble of the address. Kernel ROM is at E or F, and character ROM is at D. So it's definitely doing some fetching in the E and F range early on, which makes sense because that's the kernel. So I'm curious, what about this third output down, F2, the kernel active low select line? Let's get our last channel placed on that. Channel 8 will be kernel active low. So kernel is on pin 16 of the PLA, and that's the red logic probe there on pin 16. Kernel active low. Okay, Commodore off, run, and on. So, did we see any activity on kernel? I'm not seeing anything. That doesn't necessarily mean there is no activity on that pin, because I don't know whether this is a good PLA or not. But if we zoom in here, and if we find a location where we have AEC is low, okay, such as here. Right here, the address is F. Assuming that AEC active low means the address is valid, and read write is high, meaning it's a read. I would have thought that right here in this cycle, kernel should have gone active low. That's what I was hoping to see. So maybe I need to either get another PLA that I know works and place in that socket, or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's not what's going on right here. So now we're on channel 8 is character. Run. And power on. Power is on. Power's off. Character is low. So moving the probe to the character ROM enable, we see that it's active low. Although that's strange that the character ROM will be always enabled. That doesn't seem to make sense. I'm very suspicious of this PLA chip. Okay, we're going to try with a different Commodore 64 that I know is a known good board. So this is the board. I just happen to already have it out of the case. I've moved the chip clip over to the PLA, which notice it's in a different location on this revision of the board. And let's go ahead and move, let's go back to the kernel output. Okay, it turns out that my instincts on the meaning of the BA and the AEC signals were fairly close. Let's look at what they're actually doing. So BA can be thought of as bus available. That's a signal from the VIC2 chip that indicates that the CPU can take the bus, and the VIC2 is not trying to use the bus at the moment. BA originates right here on the VIC2 chip. Here's the BA. It snakes around and makes its way over and is this input on the PLA. AEC can be thought of as address enable control. Again, it's active low, and it also originated at the VIC2 chip here, and it makes its way over, goes through an inverter, becomes AEC NOT, and this input into the PLA. And you can also see, following it up, it is here, and it's the output enable, which is an active low input, the output enable for these 257 buffers. So when AEC is active low, the CPU has the control of the address bus, and the addresses over here on the left of these buffers propagate through to the RAM bank. So BA being high and AEC being low should be good indicators that these selects should be active. Back in pulse view, we've relabeled the 8th channel as the kernel enable, and let's arm the trigger and power on the C64. Okay, and there are lots of transitions on the kernel output now. Let's zoom into the kernel output. And notice that there are two types of pulses. There's a wider pulse, and then there are these skinny pulses. Let's zoom in a little further. Okay, and notice that this pulse is sort of a glitch pulse. It started going low because the address bus was 1111 or F, and the AEC had been low. But then the AEC transitions high, and we end this glitch pulse. So that was not going to be a true kernel access. However, over here, this probably is a valid kernel access. The AEC pulse is low. Let's see for how long. It's low for about half a microsecond. So that's a healthy pulse. So that's a healthy low pulse, and the address is F, and AEC is low, BA is high. Now, is that the correct logic for the kernel output? If we take a look at the C64 Wiki, it references a nice document on the C64 PLA Dissected. And in that document, we can take a look at the kernel logic. So P1 is a product term, and P2 is a second product term. If either one of these product terms are true, kernel ROM is selected, meaning the kernel output goes active low. And we can see that it requires the high RAM negative to be high, or not selecting high RAM, and address 15, 14, 13 should be set. So that would be the address range of E1000 all the way up to F1000. And notice the AEC negative signal must be low, and read high, and game not selected. So this is the case. We're not monitoring the end game, but there's nothing plugged into the expansion port at the moment, and we're not monitoring this signal, but for what we can see, the behavior is making sense. We see address F, and we see the address enable control being low and the read-write signal being high. So if you scan across, there are many places where the kernel output glitches low briefly, just while the input signals to the PLA are changing state. So this is normal and that's okay. This is all we're going to do with the PLA chip for today, but this has given me lots of ideas for a bigger weekend video that I would like to make. But it sure is nice seeing some actual signals that make sense coming out of the PLA. I was also able to diagnose that first Commodore has a bad PLA chip. Possibly other things could be wrong, but at least we know the PLA needs replacement. So that's going to be all for today, but this has given me a couple of ideas for how I'd like to make a thorough test of the PLA. If you like this video, give me a big thumbs up, and if you have any ideas for what you'd like to see in another video about the PLA or any other video content, let me know in the comments. So until next time, see you then.